Hello, everyone. Welcome to Being Jewish and Being Messianic. So, today we are getting ready for this week is the holiday of Purim. And so, today we're going to be talking about Purim and what are some traditional ways we celebrate it, what it is, and when we do it. So, just to be clear, Purim is on this week, it starts on Thursday night on March 13th and it continues through Friday. And remember, we always start a holiday at night. So it'll be on Thursday night. So what does Purim celebrate? It is the holiday that celebrates the preservation of the Jewish people from the edict given by Haman. And if you read the book of Esther, which is also called the Megillah, then you can hear the story of what happened to the Jewish people during this. And it's a good example of the persecution that Jews have gone through. And this is why we celebrate it, because this is one of those times where where the Jewish people have been persecuted and God saved them. And that's what this is about, is how God saves them. So we're going to get into that more. But this was during the reign of King Xerxes of Persia, and in the edict, Haman plotted to destroy the entire Jewish people on the 14th day of the Jewish month of Adar. And the name of Purim, we're going to talk more about it, but it means lots. They cast lots because he threw lots to determine what day would be auspicious for him to carry out the bloody decree that the king had issued at his instance, which is in Esther 9:24. So one of the things you'll see as you see in this picture, even we wear masks and we dress up and we have fun. And a lot of people compare this holiday to Halloween, but that's not true. Their costumes are involved in both. But we celebrate Purim with costumes because it's a reminder that natural events can be disguised as God works and that He's behind the scenes all the time, that God is in control and that He's helping and He's always there. And that's why they do it. It's just a representation of it. Some of the main events of it is the telling of the story. We read it out loud. And what's really fun, this is one of the fun holidays. It's a minor holiday, so it doesn't have to be celebrated, but it's one of the more fun holidays because we get together and in our synagogues and we read the story. And when Haman's name is mentioned, you'll see up here in this corner, this is called a grogger or a noisemaker. And they use the noisemakers, and every time you say Haman's name, they shout out, they yell, they'll stomp their feet, they'll make noise, use noisemakers. Every time you say his name, I've even seen people that will write the name of Haman on the bottom of their shoe, and then when Haman's name is told in the story, they stomp their feet to stomp out his name. So there's a lot of reasons to do this. And so why do they do this? Well, the reason for that is in Deuteronomy 25:19, where Israel was ordered to blot out the name of Amalekite from under the heavens. And in Esther, we find out Haman is related to that king that was supposed to have been killed in Deuteronomy, but was not. And because he was not killed, then his lineage went on, and these are the people that ended up attacking the Jews. So why did Haman want to do this? As I said, it's a fun holiday. We dress up, and this is actually in Israel, um, where people are dressed up that way. But we're first introduced to Haman in Esther chapter 3, and he was honored by a man honored by King Xerxes, and his father was an Agite. Haman's father isn't what is important to the name of it, but it was because he was an Agite and he had a horrible distaste for the Jewish people. And that is a key to this. So because he was that way, his family lineage was from King Agite, the Amalekite that was mentioned in 1 Samuel 15. God asked Saul to kill all living things in the battle with these and leaving nothing. And Saul ignored God's command. And he spared the king Agag, which later led Saul to being rejected as king. That's what one of the consequences of Saul not obeying God was that he was later rejected as king and replaced by David. The prophet Samuel actually is the one that killed the king, but some of the family lived on, and that was the problem. So in 1 Samuel 15:33, the book of Esther calls Haman the Agagite, suggests that's where we know that he was from there. And just kind of a backstory on that, the Israelites and the Amalekites had a long, violent history, and it went back to even when the Israelites left Egyptian slavery, they crossed through the Red Sea through the nation of Amalekite, who was a descendant of Esau. And he landed an attack on the Jewish people without provocation, which you can find in Exodus 17. Exodus 8 in verse 15 states, because hands were lifted up against the throne of the Lord will be against the Amalekites from generation to generation. So we have a history. That's why we have it. So we have this big fight between them going on. And Haman hated the Jews. He hated the Israelites. In the story, if you've ever read the story of Esther, it's a beautiful story, and I would suggest that you look at that. Okay. I'm having somebody tell me that they're not seeing a picture on my screen. Are you seeing the screen share?
I'm seeing people with noses and dressed up in costumes.
Okay, good to know. That is exactly what they are. They're dressed up as clowns. Okay. So in the story of Esther, Mordecai was the uncle of Esther, who's a devoted Jewish man and a royal officer later in the palace. And he was introduced to Haman in Esther 3. The king had honored Haman in such a way that made him higher than anyone else. And he decreed that everyone had to bow down to him. Mordecai wouldn't do it and couldn't do it because he couldn't bow to another person like that and to worship them. So when Haman passed through the king's gates, everyone else knelt, but Mordecai did not. And that, on top of the fact that he already didn't like Jews, this just really infuriated Haman, and he decided he wanted to kill all Jews. And that's what our story's about, is that he decided not just to kill Mordecai, but all Jews. What he didn't know was at the very beginning of the story of Esther, one of the other things that we have a lot of times is little beauty pageants, because Vashti, which was King Xerxes' first wife, she disobeyed him, and there's different versions of the story where she was executed or she was exiled. Most stories go with exiled, but she was definitely no longer in there, and he decided to replace her, and the royals decided to hold a beauty pageant. Esther was told by her uncle, Mordecai, to hide her identity, which she did. She kept it hidden from them. And so the king ended up choosing her after a period of time, and she became the queen, but no one knew that she was actually a Jew. And that's one of the things about this. So when Haman turned around and decided to have all of the Jews killed, he went to the king, and with the king's approval, um, and even offers of money to King Xerxes to pay for any expense for having all the Jews killed, and that the king could then take all of the money and resources that the Jews had after they were killed. Xerxes thought that was a pretty good idea in Esther 3:7. So Haman drew lots or threw dice to decide the dates. And in Esther 3:7, that's where the month is picked. It's the Jewish month of Nisan. So it's usually the end of March, mid-April for us. And then the dice determined the date of 13th day of Adar, which is mid-February to mid-March, was almost a full year away, and that's when they would be killed. And they would be killed all through the land, not just in where they were living, but everywhere. So how did this Esther then turn around and do this? Well, through this story, you see that, as I said, Haman hated the Jews, and this continued on. And again, he had no idea who Esther was. So, keeping that in the back of your mind when this is going on, Esther, when she heard of it, she asked for, when it came to her attention, and Mordecai told her about this, she asked that everyone pray and fast for 3 days. And that's in Esther 4:16. So Esther asked Mordecai to have all the Jews everywhere. And they prayed, and they just kept coming towards God. And one of the most beautiful things somebody had said to me, because Esther first didn't want to do this. She was going to go in front of the king, and if the king, to appear before the king could have meant her death. unless he took his scepter and raised it towards her. So she took a big chance, and that's why she was asking everybody to pray. She argued about doing it, as most of us probably would have done. And one of the things that was mentioned earlier, just to me, was in Esther 4, chapter 4, 14. And Mordecai said to her, "And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this." And that's the key thing of the story is God put her in a position at the right time and the right place, the right time. So it wasn't Esther. We always say Esther saved the Jews from destruction. It wasn't Esther. It was God who saved it. So Esther, like I said, she had everyone pray and fast for the 3 days to keep her from getting killed. And after that, she entered the courts before the king. And when he saw Queen Esther standing in the court, he was pleased with her and held out his golden scepter. And we know that in Esther 5:2. So she didn't tell him what she wanted. She went ahead and she knew it wasn't time to just say who she was and what was going on. So she pampered the king at a feast she prepared for him and Haman. Even the king knew she had a request to make, but for a reason not revealed in scripture, she doesn't actually plead for her people, but again invites the king and Haman to a second feast. It was the timing of everything is what she was having to be correct. But it also allowed, during this timing, I think God also was using that as the timing to allow other things to happen. So during this, it was also a trap because Haman had a trap of his own making. In the time gap between the two feasts, Haman meets up with Mordecai again. He becomes enraged and he orders a pole to be built in his own courtyard and seeks the king permission to impale Mordecai immediately instead of waiting until the edict happened. But when Haman goes to the king, it's in the middle of the night, and the king couldn't sleep, so he had his servants reading to him. And Mordecai had saved the king from an execution plot, which was in Esther 2, chapter 2. So the king, instead of letting Haman tell what he wanted and listening to it, he orders Haman to honor Mordecai with a parade. So just before the second feast with the king, instead of being able to kill Mordecai, Haman has to walk around town with Mordecai wearing the king's clothing and on the king's horse. And at that moment, Haman's wife offered a warning. Since Mordecai, before whom your downfall has started, is of Jewish origin, you cannot stand against him. Surely you'll come to ruin. She prophesies in Esther 6:13 that her husband would be destroyed. And she was right. So with that warning, he goes to Esther's second feast. And at the second feast, Esther finally reveals she's a Jew and pleads for her people. And she points the finger at Haman, who dared to destroy the queen of Persia. The king was already outraged at this point, and he learns of Haman's plans to kill Mordecai and orders Haman's to be impaled on the pole instead. So Haman is killed and his sons are killed. And Esther pleads for Haman's edict to be revoked. The problem is when King Xerxes put that in, he couldn't do anything about it. He couldn't revoke it because he'd used his signet symbol, and he had to then allow Mordecai and Esther to write another edict to counteract that one, where the Jews were allowed to attack anybody that was going to hurt them. So Mordecai and Esther was sent out to all the provinces of Persia on the 23rd day of Sivan, and which would have been May or June. So it was still a full 9 months before Haman's edict would have been enacted, which was ample time to take care of the problem. So that's the story. So why do we celebrate it? Well, we know that in Esther 9:18, which she talks about, Esther said that we had to have a day of feasting and joy. And we know in Esther chapter 9 throughout it, it talks about where Mordecai recorded all these events that happened that I kind of put in a nutshell, and that the people should celebrate annually. It's a time when Jews get a relief from their enemies, and the month of sorrow was turned into joy and a day of celebration. So we know that's why it's a day of celebration of being persecuted. And the scripture's clear that the Purim had to start on the 13th day of Adar. So it's about 11 months after Haman's death. So the thing is about this that it is not a major holiday. It's not something it's talked about. I know it says it's in scripture to in Esther, but it's not in the Torah. And remember, the Torah is the first 5 books of the Bible. And because it's not in the Torah, it technically is not a major holiday and it's not required. It's not a God mandated one. But Esther and Mordecai are the ones that said that it should be done forever. And so that's why it is done forever, even though it's not a major holiday. So, as I said, it's a huge holiday. And this year, Purim begins on Thursday night, March 13th, so this week. And it continues until Shabbat on March 14th. So remember, always the night before. So at sunset on Friday night, it ends. So we do it there. It commemorates the divine salvation of the Jewish people in ancient Persia, where Haman's plot to destroy and annihilate the Jews, infant and women, literally everyone. He wanted to kill everyone and everything they had. So that's why we're doing it. And as I said earlier, Purim actually means lots. It was lottery. It was just their way of doing it at the time. So Haman's, it's really the thing about it, and we do know from the writings and everything of the time that Haman's edict actually created a spiritual revival amongst the Jews at that time. This was a time where they were living in a land and had started becoming very indoctrinated into into the Persian culture. And we know that when this happened, then they clearly came out and became their own people and had a real revival towards God saving them. So it's kind of interesting that they had been persecuted, they'd been in a land that was not their own, and they started having a revival to go back into it. So there was a big movement towards God from this. As I said, so all of these things happened into those times. And it's kind of one of those stories where, it's an interesting story. And we do know the other thing about King Xerxes, we do have an idea of who he was in history. And I've read different stories about Esther and who she was, the other names that the Greeks gave for her and things. And they don't always portray her favorably because she was their enemy. But it's interesting because there is a lot of references that we can find towards that this happened and that this is an actual event. I know that sometimes with biblical history, we can't prove everything completely, but there is a lot there that shows that this actually happened. So
I have,
again, the key character. Go ahead.
before I jump on the plane, I have one question to ask, or one
Okay.
point to. So, so my understanding of the fast of Esther and Purim is that before that happened, the king threw a feast, and he put in this feast all the pagan foods, and I think it was probably Haman who organized that feast to defile the Jews. And so, didn't they use like the temple artifacts or something? And the Jews went ahead and ate because they wanted the favor of the king, except for Mordecai, which was the reason why Mordecai could intercede for God's people. So they were all in danger of being killed. This whole thing by Haman was in retribution from God for their defilement that happened during the feast. Did that ring a bell to you at all?
It
Am I
does.
right?
And yes, no, you are right. There is, and that's happened more than once in history where the Jews were, then that's where that's what I was saying about it, they became indoctrinated into the culture. And one of the things that I'm going to kind of talk about why we eat certain foods is because Esther also did not. She actually kept they believe she kept a vegetarian diet while she was there. Remember, Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego did the same thing when they were in another country because they couldn't eat the defiled foods that were set before them. They also had to have a vegetarian diet. And a lot of times in history, you'll see where when Jews are if they're remaining close to God and remaining as part of their covenant, then they will turn around and be go ahead and just eat a vegetarian diet. Mordecai and Esther both did that. You are correct that there was a big feast. And also at that feast is where we also have one of the things that they talk about, and there's kind of, it's how it's interpreted. So I should also talk about the debauchery, I guess. In that particular feast, and a feast would go on for days. It could go on for quite some time. Vashti, who was the queen, was also holding a feast herself, and King asked her. He didn't ask. The king ordered her to come before him. The way these things are written, it appears that he only wanted her to come in front of all of his nobles, wearing her crown and just her crown, and she refused. So even though Vashti was part of, it was probably just as bad and everything, that is, she even had it, she drew a line in the sand. But that's why they had a beauty pageant and to find a new queen. And through time, Esther was the one that was picked. So great question and great addition to that. Thank you for that. But like I said, these are the different characters of them and the roles and why each one of them matters. So Esther, why she matters. She ended up, after being pushed, was willing to risk her life to save her people. And that exemplifies the courage and selflessness. And her hidden identity and eventually revelation highlights how God can work through seemingly ordinary individuals in extraordinary ways. From everything we know, she wasn't an extraordinary person in any other way, but God used her in an extraordinary method. Mordecai, why he mattered. He kept an unwavering faith no matter what. And as Pastor Lynn was saying, I mean, he refused to compromise his principles. Well, that is what set the entire stage for our narrative of the Purim. His leadership and guidance were essential in mobilizing the Jewish community. He actually replaced Haman after Haman was killed, and he took over, and he was a really good leader. So he is the one that was he continued following God and doing what God said through everything, no matter what. Kings Ahasuerus or Xerxes, whichever you want to call him. And his power and authority, wow, he just was very susceptible to influence, both good and bad. And he really exemplifies how human rulers can be instruments of justice and injustice. His final decision to allow the Jews to defend themselves was what allowed their salvation and for them to not be killed and to go ahead and have the revival and get back towards God and everything. He seems to be rather easily manipulated, which isn't a good thing in a leader. And of course, we have Haman. So Haman is the archetype of the oppressor. His hatred, his desire for power, it just serves as a reminder of the constant threat of being anti-Semitic. And his downfall symbolizes the triumph of good over evil. And those are the key messages. When you hear the story of Esther, those are the key messages that we tend to really focus on when we're telling the story in Purim. And again, I mentioned it earlier, but Purim actually means lot in ancient Persian. And they called it that because of the casting of lots. And we're going to talk about it a little bit, but there's different ways to pronounce Purim. Some more right than others. So what do we do? How do we celebrate it? It's a fun celebration. It's a big party. And usually we go through and we read the entire story of Book of Esther. Or like I said, it's also called the Megillah. And we could do this by giving money to at least two people because you're helping other people, and sending gifts of kind to people, food, two kinds to at least one person. But it's a huge feast and celebration, and There's a lot of wine drinking and other intoxicating beverages. The spirit of liveliness and fun is unparalleled. We don't have any other holiday that's quite like that. It's a day to let loose and just be Jewish. This is the way they think of it. Customary for children and adults to dress up in costumes. And like I said, a lot of times they'll have beauty pageants. And I have seen stormtroopers as Haman before. I've seen people dress up in all sorts of different costumes. But probably one of my favorite ways is these little cookies here. And I've made these many times. They are called Hamantaschen. Oh, they are so good. It's a three-cornered pastry, and usually it has poppy seeds, or you can have other fillings. I've seen people use chocolate. I've actually used cherry and cherry jam and different raspberry jam in it. So it's kind of a fun way to do it. The day before Purim, or if Purim falls on Sunday, then we actually do it on Thursday because of the Sabbath on Friday. But normally it's the day before, and that's what it is this year. It's customary to fast and commemorate Esther's fasting and praying for God that saved his people. So the way it works this year, the way it works is that it's the same for us. It's the same day. So Purim starts Thursday night. We fast starting at sunrise on Thursday until sunset. It's only a small fast. It's not a larger fast like we do for some of the other holidays. But again, on this Thursday, Jews across the world will be fasting during the day, and then that night they will have the Purim party and have the Purim celebration. Again, this is not some of the things it's not required. So we have a lot of celebration, dressing up in costumes, eating the Hamantaschen. We do always tell the story of Esther. And like I said, I would encourage you to read the story. It's a good way to do it. It's a lot of fun to read the story. It's a good story. And there's some unique aspects of Purim, which I always thought. So it's common custom is, again, to celebrate Purim on Adar, and because that's when our ancestors rested from war against their enemies. What's fascinating to me is in walled cities, the Jews of Shushan rested one day later. Their Purim was deferred to the 15th. And so they have included that to any walled city in the days up to the days of Joshua, and most notably Jerusalem. It always celebrated a day later. In small towns in ancient time, the villagers only banded together with fellow Jews in the larger towns on Mondays and Thursday, which those were typically market days in those times. And the sages decreed they should read the Megillah on the market day preceding the 14th of Adar. And that's no longer practiced. We just do it on the 14th of Adar. When we were studying the calendar, I mentioned that we have leap years. So, and I don't know if this rings a bell, but I also had mentioned that there is an Adar 1, and there's a second month of Adar. And that's when only the years we have leap years. And Adar is the month that we add as an addition. When that happens, Purim falls on the second month of Adar. And the first month of Adar, the 14th, is still a happy day, and it's called Small Purim, but it's not when we celebrate it. We celebrate the second Adar on the 14th. So kind of a little weirdness about it, but the reason it's done that way is because Purim has to be 1 month before Passover or Pesach. And that's where we have the issue with those the months that we've talked about in the past. So that's why we do it. And this is a Megillah, one copy of it. The Megillah is beautiful. A Megillah, again, means scroll, and they're almost always very beautiful, all the ones I've ever seen. Some cool facts are it is our most fun holiday. We celebrate it with a lot of partying and different things like that. We always think that Mordecai and Esther are the heroes of the day. And as you can see, that's a handwritten parchment. All of that is done on there. And it's just, again, they're so beautiful. I went to one synagogue one time where they had a collection of them, and they were just amazingly done. So, There are 4 Purim mitzvahs that we do, and a mitzvah is a good deed. And we do it by celebrating these 4 rituals. We read the Megillah, which recounts the story of or Esther or the Purim miracle. And this is done once on the eve, the night before Purim, and then we go into the following day and read it. I mentioned earlier, we give monetary gifts to at least 2 poor people and send gifts of 2 kinds of food to at least 1 person. And we have to have a Purim feast because you just fasted, so you're going to have a party. And we spend those groggers or noisemakers. We have noisemakers that we do. And it's just like I said, it's a very fun time. One of the other things is that people will drink, and the sages, the Talmud asserted that a person is obligated to drink on Purim until he does not know the difference between blessed is Mordecai and cursed is Haman. And so there's a lot of drinking on that holiday, and it doesn't apply to everyone, and it actually applies to the men to do that. And that's not a requirement. It's just something the sages had said to do. And I talked about hamantash. And the other thing we do is, oddly enough, we also have chicken soup. It's one of the best dishes, the most common dishes you'll see there. And all of these are things that have different representation to us. And I talked about we masquerade on Purim. And again, these are like the hidden treats. The hamantash, they are a 3-cornered treat with different things, but the reason they're 3-cornered is because the treat is supposed to be kind of hidden in there, and it's the hidden message of God. And the seeds usually represent the vegetarian diet that she kept while she was secretly keeping kosher. So all of these things, the mask, the wearing the mask, wearing costumes, and having the hamantash are just to remind us of the secret that God, sometimes things happen in secret, that God's really coming forward. Okay, and I already told you about the others. Okay, so some really interesting things about Purim. There have been several big miracles that happened on Purim. And there's so many times that Jewish communities awfully narrowly escape catastrophe. More often than not, the plot involves an evil tyrant who follows the ways of Haman. And just like in the Purim story, God is there to save his people from certain doom. So a lot of communities make their own Purim holidays on the anniversary of their prospective salvation. They can even, sometimes they'll even read the Megillah or have another scroll that they read. But some of the ones that are more common in the 1950s, Joseph Stalin, who's on the left, was the ruthless butcher of millions of innocent people and had big plans for dealing with the Jewish problem, as he called it, in the USSR. And just as things were reaching a boiling point in 1953, he died on Purim. So it's interesting. He died and it changed things. And then the Gulf War. With 1990, Saddam Hussein, who's on the right, was leading Iraq, and he was invaded nearby Kuwait. And the pressure ramped up from the international community, and he was sending Scud missiles into Israel. People were actually praying, and there was some rabbis that were saying, no, God's going to protect us. And believe it or not, the U.S.-led forces attacked Iraq and were victorious, and the hostilities ended on Purim. And this year, what's kind of interesting is we have a blood moon on Purim that night. So that means that we're having a total lunar eclipse here in North America. So it's kind of interesting that that's going to be happening on Purim. You can see on this one, partial lunar eclipse, but look at this, how much of the US is seeing it, all of it, which is a little unusual, but that's when we'll be seeing it during the night. It will be a total lunar eclipse. So Purim greetings. You'll hear different ways people say it, and you can see people will say Happy Purim, and you'll hear Chag Purim, Samach. And Yiddish, they'll do it, and I don't know if I'll say this one right because I don't speak Yiddish. Afrachun Purim. So there's different ways to do it, and you will hear different ways. But the most common way for Westerners is to say Purim. So what can we learn as Christians from? So like I said, it's not a major holiday, but there's a lot to learn and a lot to take away from this story. It's a beautiful story. And if you've never read it, please do. It's a wonderful story to read. But some takeaways from it is God is always working, even if we don't see it. There's a hidden, God is always in the background. He's always guiding us and He's taking care of us. And it's good to celebrate things through generosity of helping other people. And God does have a sense of humor and wants us to have fun. Maybe not the drinking part, but He does want us getting the drunk part, but He wants us to have fun. And He wants us to enjoy our relationships with Him. So, just keeping that in mind, there are so many things to learn from the story and to read it and realize that God had, in this case, God had Esther for such a time as this. And sometimes He does that. He puts people in the right place at the right time to take care of things. And that's what we always have to look at. So you could also see these some comparisons that's often used is in Exodus 7:12, where God revealed His grandeur and power in a miraculous moment as He did in Egypt, but He chose different ways to rescue His people. He's always working behind the scenes, and you see the selection. I mean, Vashti's getting killed, and then having Esther come in for a beauty pageant and then hiding the fact that she was a Jew. God was setting things in motion even before that. There was all sorts of things being set in motion. And we've talked about how when the people were leaving Egypt, that all of the things they were gathering, because God was setting things in motion to build the tabernacle and to build later on, to build the first temple. He set those things into motion. And we always have to keep that in mind, that He's always in control and He's always moving things forward for us. And in Romans 8:28, we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love Him and have been called according to His purpose. And that's what we have to remember, is that following what God's plan is for it. And even when it's difficult, even when you're having to go in front of the king of Persia and risk your life, if that's what God calls you to do, it's doing what God tells you to do. It may not always be what we want, but it's following God's way. So how do you celebrate? So my family, we this year we will be doing the fast. And as I said, it is Thursday morning is when it starts. And then we will actually, we're planning on reading the Megillah, which is what we usually do, or the story book of Esther. And this is my husband's costume this year. This is Mordecai. Or no, excuse me, this is Haman. This is his Haman costume. One of the other things that my grandkids and I have talked about doing is doing on the Zoom call. If you look in your Zoom features, you can actually give yourself like a cat costume, cat face. You can do all sorts of different things like that. We're going to be doing different things like that. And sometimes when we're doing Zoom, when we tell the story, I'll have them open on mic and they can go, boo, yes, or whatever they want to do that. So yeah. And we are planning on having chicken soup, and I believe everybody's having hamantaschen. So that's what we are going to be doing for our holiday this year. So I'd like to share that, as I said, Passover is coming up, and the Lord's led me that we need to get ready for Passover because it's in a month. So this week, as I said, on the 13th is the fast and then Purim, and doing that on your own. Next week, we're going to be talking about the veil in the temple. When we were talking about Herod's temple last week, I really got put upon my heart that I need to talk about the veil. The veil is something very special that when Jesus died, it wasn't just like a curtain that ripped in your home. There's a lot more to this. It really is truly a miracle of what happened. And that's what we're going to be looking at, is the miracle of the veil and how that impacts us today. And then the next week, we're probably going to be looking at kosher and also kosher for Passover, because there is a difference. And we're also be looking at, these might change the order, but we're going to be looking at the Seder elements and Moses and why he was picked. And then Passover will be starting on April 12th. So you can see it's just really is a month away. So that is what I had on the story of Passover or Purim, getting us ready for it. And I see. Okay. There was a question about a song, and I'm going to have to go look that up because I actually don't know your answer to Hava Nagila. I don't think that it has to do, I've never heard it sung on Purim, but doesn't mean that it's not, but I will have to look that up. So first for the elders, did you guys have any thoughts about okay, how do I fast on Purim? It actually is a food and water fast, but you're only doing it for the daytime. You're starting on Thursday morning at sunrise, whatever time sunrise is for you, and then you end it and start reading the book of Esther at sunset. So it's only the day Thursday. It's only Thursday this week or this year. That's it. So it's just Thursday morning to Thursday night, and it is food and water. But one of the things that is always very clear with any kind of fasting is that it should be done correctly. Ask the Lord if He wants you to do it. That's the first thing. If you're thinking about doing it, always ask the Lord if you should be fasting, and because why? Why are you fasting? And then the next thing is, if you have health issues, like if you're diabetic or something, or pregnant or anything like that, then there are modified fasts. Sometimes there's people that cannot fast at all, so they may fast from like TV or reading anything other than scripture that day. That's where you have to ask the Lord. And that I would say that of any kind of fast, asking the Lord what He wants you to do. So I hope that helped. Now I'm going to ask the elders, do you have any thoughts about Purim and the book of Esther?
Hi, Gail. I thank you so much for this lesson. It was really good and gave some remembrance to me when I went through the book of Esther, and I also agree with what you said about fasting. It's really asking the Lord if you should be fasting and what is the reason the Lord wants you to fast during this time as well. And like you said also, sometimes we just think about food, but there's so many other ways we can fast, sustain from something that I often think of something that's very important to you, like you said also a TV show, social media, stuff like that, things that you spend a lot of time with, and laying that down and spend that time with the Lord. So, but yes, I love the story of Esther. Oh gosh, it's so amazing. But thank you. Very good lesson. Thank you.
I'm glad you guys enjoyed it. It's one of the most unique holidays for the Jewish people, because it is a celebration of the time of somebody trying to wipe them out, and it really is a reminder of how God saves them, and how God has been there for them, and how God is always the one in control. And that's what we always have to think about, is that God's the one in control, not us. So now I'm going to go ahead and open it up. And does anybody have any questions or any thoughts? Anything you'd like to ask about it? Or if you have any questions coming up towards getting ready for Passover, you can also ask those questions as well. Okay. I am super excited about Passover. Passover, like I said, it's funny because the Lord has had me do this different ways. There are different meanings to different things. And in the story of Passover, we do we have Passover for 7 days, and we go through and tell the story. We're required to tell the story at least twice. So we usually do it the first 2 nights. And this year, I'm going to be focusing on some different aspects of it. In the past, my family always has this is our tradition. This is just ours. We have the tradition of finding different ways to look at it each year. One year, we spent a lot of time, the 10 plagues. There was a very specific reason God chose the plagues He chose. And each one of those plagues, each one of them had to do with I use the word gods, minor god, in Egyptian culture. And like the frogs, there was a god for that. There was different things for each one of them. The hail, all of these different things had different representation. So one year we really spent a lot of time looking at those. Another year, this has happened a couple different times where we really delved into the life of Moses and why was Moses the chosen one and what was so unique about him. So kind of a different things. Um, Is there a significant this year because Purim has a sign in the sky? I don't know if you guys have been watching, but there's been a lot of signs in the skies recently, and Pastor Lynn's talked about airplanes and things coming out of the sky. But this year has been a very unusual year, and there was let's see, it was February 28th. There was an alignment of the planets, 7 planets, a perfect alignment of 7 planets in a row, which that is it's very rare to have that happen. And there's been some other things that have been very unusual in the sky. So I would say yes, there's probably huge significance, and that would be more for Pastor Lynn to cover than for me. But I would say there's a lot of different significance this year of things in the sky, and the Bible tells us to look towards the sky. Any other questions on that? Well, I have the second here. I did have this other question. I'm looking up something really fast on. But if you haven't ever read the book of Esther, I really would encourage you to read that because that is just a fascinating story and it's just so beautiful. Okay, so I was asked about Hava Nagila, which means let us rejoice. It's a beautiful song. It is a folk song. And I was thinking, it doesn't really, it was created in the 1800s at Tsarist Russia. There was a lot of cruel decrees against the Jews during that time. So that's when it was written. But that particular song it is just a Jewish folk song. And every time I've ever heard it, it's been like at weddings. I've heard it at bar and bat mitzvahs and other celebrations. I can't say I've ever heard it at Purim, but it is a good song to sing. It's a very beautiful song. So, yeah. So good question, though, because it was a very good question about what kind of music we have. So usually the way the synagogues I've gone to, usually the way it works is everybody does most everybody fast on the day of the holiday going into it. And then you get there, and we usually start the way we've usually started is we have a little parade, a little beauty contest for the boys and the girls of dressing up as Mordecai and Esther. And they do that, or there'll be a little parade of costumes where anybody who's wearing a costume gets to parade, first the kids and then the adults. And then we tell the story, and they tell the story first in a very shortened version for the kids. So the kids can go play, and they have activities for them, and they take them out of the main part of the synagogue and take them over into the classrooms usually. And they have fun, and they have cookies and cakes, and they do all sorts of fun things. And then the adults go ahead and tell the story again. And this is where the drinking and all the partying come in and where they start doing the noisemakers and things. But again, it's just a huge celebration. And I would encourage you to find your own way to celebrate it, even if it's just reading the story and reading about it. I would encourage you to do that on this holiday. So I hope that was helpful. And it looks like I have several people that are having to drop off, so nice. And good luck on your journeys. And like I said, next week we'll be looking at the veil in the temple. I have some interesting data about the veil in the temple and why this was such a big thing and what a miracle it was that this happened. I always think, for me personally, every time I'd ever thought about the veil in the temple, I thought of a curtain, just a regular curtain. I'm like, oh, a curtain got ripped. Nope, that's not what happened. It's not a normal curtain. And it's a very different story. And so I think it'll be interesting to go into that and to dive into what a miracle it was and the meaning of the torn curtain. So I hope you look forward to hearing that. And I don't have anything else. So I'm going to go ahead and I guess I'll close this in prayer. Okay. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for allowing us to come together and to learn about your people and to learn about the celebrations. And this one about the different times, the different miracles where you have protected your people, just as you protect us. And you protected the Jewish people from different calamities that were befalling them. You've always said you would, and you've kept your word, and you always keep your word to us. You are so good to us, Lord, and we thank you so much for that. And Lord, thank you for this season that we're getting into. Well, first we're celebrating Purim, and then we're going in less than a month. Well, right out a month, we're going into Passover. What a wonderful time for us to hear and see all the things that Jesus did for us and that the Heavenly Father does for us and the Holy Spirit does for us as well. There's so many miracles and so many aspects of this to look at. Let us see it the way you do. And let's understand all that you've done. Well, as much as we can, the things you've done for us. There's so many vast layers of things you've done for us, and we thank you for those. During Passover, we say Dayenu. If that had been all you had done, that would have been enough. But Lord, you continue to do more and more. So Dayenu. And Lord, using the sword of the Spirit, severing soul ties with anyone or anything, we leave this meeting. And Lord, help us to continue to learn and grow in your ways and learn about you in your precious name. Amen. Shalom, everyone. Um, I hope I hope everybody has a great week, and I will see you all next week, hopefully. And again, have fun learning about Esther this week and reading and celebrating in your own way, the way God leads you to celebrate. Have a great week. Bye, everyone.